did.
'Cause we're the best, we're smart. We don't need no man, but we kind of need a man.
I still got to open jars sometimes.
Yes. I would be starving if I didn't.
You know what? I got mad cooking skills, and I still don't most of the time. Jake
That's
cooks
awesome.
like 100% of our meals.
I was like,
wonderful.
I realized I'm like, oh, this is his plan to make me incompetent and have to rely upon him for daily needs. But I love it. All right. Everybody, welcome back to Black Card Rehab, the show where we go from zero to black, one episode at a time. I am joined by my white friend, Paige.
Hello.
Hey, on a scale of 0 to black, how are you feeling today?
Not black at all. And it is devastatingly tragic when I have to, when anyone has to witness how horribly racist our country still is, and the tragic loss of life that happens from that. And no, I'm not black. And that's the problem, is that I'm treated differently and I shouldn't be. So we'll leave it at that for today.
Yeah.
Yes. So Crystal, on a scale of 0 to African American, how are you feeling today?
I am feeling I'm feeling Audre Lorde, which is very black, also very gay, but I guess that's not
Here
the point that I I just very inspired by some of the quotes that from essays that she's written, particularly ones about self-care, because we're not all built for the protest, and not that the people that are protesting should even have to. I think it's coming out of just flowing out of it's the natural progression of being under the foot of this country. And I actually thought about making this episode a little bit more serious, and we are going to talk about some serious things, but I've already had such a significant round of extricating myself from some things that prevented me, or would have prevented me from existing, like feeling like I can exist as a Black person in this country. And so now I don't have to exit those things anymore. I don't have to leave a job or leave a community because I feel like they don't get it and I'm forced to pretend all the time. Now I'm in a place where I don't have to pretend. And most of my relationships, I don't even have to act as if this is not something that's very real and very present. And I have a lot of people that are checking in on me, and that is such a different place than I was 4 years ago when we first started to see a lot of footage. I mean, not that it wasn't happening, but there was a lot of footage just out there that you could just visibly see what was going on. So yeah, I'm feeling that lady.
Yeah. Will Smith had a really interesting quote where he was just like, racism isn't different now, it's just filmed. And I was like, he right. He is right. Yes.
Yep. It's so true. And there's no mistaking the pictures or the footage. And man, it's just like, what's interesting is because I'm in an international, I guess, relationship. Like my family, I guess who I consider my family now, like a lot of them live overseas. So like they're in France and in Israel, and they're asking my boyfriend, like, so when are you guys moving? It's just like, it's so like putrid to them.
Yeah.
You know, and that isn't even people's knee-jerk response, you know, to leave. They're like, why would you stay? This is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that other countries warn travelers to the US about our level of racism
Mm-hmm.
should be an indicator that there is a huge problem. I mean, there's many indicators before that, but if for some reason you missed the giant wall of red flags, yeah, if you missed the giant wall of red flags that is just America in general, and that was your only indicator, it's still a pretty good indicator that things are bad.
Yeah. So I decided that today we would talk about the movie Get Out, which fortunately we both have seen, you know, prior to this podcast. It's a movie that Paige, you had seen and I had forced myself to see. Mainly for the forcing part really just has to do with the fact that I'm truly a scaredy cat. And like, look, if you are somebody who like loves horror movies and are like, that shit wasn't scary, please take several seats, okay? Because us scaredy cats over here are very sensitive. So yeah, I watched this movie through my fingers, and yeah, but I loved it. I mean, honestly, it's just like I want to know, Paige, when you, I guess, tell me about your experience leading up to watching it and then watching it.
So I had been a Key and Peele fan since Mad TV days.
Okay.
We used to watch Mad TV and SNL growing up, and one of my dad's favorite sketches was Keegan-Michael Key's gym teacher sketch. I don't know if you're familiar.
I'm vaguely familiar with that character, but I don't think I remember watching it on Mad TV, actually. Like he had like fake sideburns or something, like,
yes,
and like wearing like a headband.
Yes,
and
very tiny shorts.
Yes,
like,
okay,
very like 1970s basketball level tiny shorts, and very tight too. And he would, as he would get angrier, like break a clipboard, and like his voice would go up like an extra octave, like son of a bitch, and just like, and the point of the sketch was always him doing something that the coach wouldn't normally have to do. Like one of the best ones is where he has to direct the school play. And that is so great. And he would always be like high kicking in those shorts, hysterical. I was also a huge fan of the Chappelle Show, where Chappelle left the show and was very angry that Key and Peele came in and did just kind of a similar formatted sketch show, and there's bad blood there. I watched all of it.
Yeah, like, same.
Yeah, part of me was like, but we're the same audience. Just like, if you'd kept doing your show, I would have watched that, and also Key and Peele. Also it's just like I
just have so many thoughts about, like, I need to try to keep my own personal feelings out of it, but trying to set that aside, like, how selfish to be like, I want to do it and I don't want anybody else to ever do it, to do what I did.
I invented variety shows. Yeah, it's a little weird.
Like, okay, like, what did you want them to do? Like, send you royalties from this show?
Well, I don't
work like that.
I was like, oh, so are you going to start paying royalties to Carol Burnett? Or
yeah, right. Exactly.
You know, both brilliant shows. I think there were some things that Key and Peele got to do that just because the world was a little more progressive at the time, that Chappelle didn't get to do, and I can understand some anger there. But I saw their movie together, Keanu, Because
which I've seen a third of.
Love Key and Peele, love Kittens, and my friend Jamar Neighbors is in the movie, and so I was like, I gotta see it. So when Jordan Peele announced that he was gonna do a horror movie, I was really excited, in part because I love horror movies, but also Jordan Peele had been kind of a fixture in the horror community. Like, if you knew your horror shit, he'd been around for a while, and it was everyone else that didn't know about it. Because even while he was on Key and Peele, he was a super horror nerd, and he would like facilitate Q&As for people and contribute to, like, Eli Roth would do these like history of horror specials, or like a special on AMC for Halloween, and he would be one of their like confessional talking heads before he even did get out. And so I wasn't surprised to see it. There are actually like Key and Peele sketches based on The Shining. There's a bunch of like horror precedent there. And no one really knew what he was going to do with the movie, but like, if you were a fan, I was like on board already. I was like, when this comes out, I'm going. So when it came out, I don't think anybody knew what to expect initially. And when people initially saw the movie, I remember seeing the trailer and being like, oh shit, this looks awesome. And then when it came out, there was like a week of people being like, this is great. I am surprised that this is what this was. But it's so inventive and unique, which is great. Like, that's the best thing you can have for a horror movie, is like, oh, this is different from almost everything else. And what I find interesting is, if you talk to Jordan Peele about it, like in interviews and stuff, he actually doesn't see it as different, which is fascinating to me. Because it really, when he breaks it down, you're like, oh, it's not different. These are horror tropes through your lens, and it's a lens that we haven't seen enough of.
I mean, so I wasn't I wouldn't have said that like I, like followed really Jordan beyond anything besides the Key and Peele show. But I do remember, like, I mean, there were so many sketches that either had a very either Rod Serling feel or a Hitchcock feel. Like, I remember one in particular. I love that it, like, he bridged the gap between, like, I guess Twilight Zone and Family Matters somehow. Like, you know which one I'm talking about? Where Reginald Vell Johnson, like, and like Urkel is like a robot. Like,
yes.
I was like, wow, buddy. If you guys haven't seen that sketch, look it up. It's very funny. And then of course there's the one where the guy doesn't know what a continental breakfast is.
Yes. That's my favorite.
Yes. I mean,
I mean, there are so many great jokes in that sketch, but one of my favorite ones is that he's like picking up foods and he's just like, from Belgium, and you're like, that's a banana.
Yeah. Or like
he sits there.
When you say Greek yogurt from like the Netherlands or something like that, it's like, but you just said Greek yogurt.
And he's like shoveling it all into his mouth. And then he's like, I'm so excited. I'm incontinent. And it gets me every single time. And that sketch is hilarious on its own. But one of the best Easter eggs in that sketch is that he goes to the counter and he's like, I would like to extend my stay. And they're like, but you've always been here, which is a callback to The Shining. But even further, they cut to a photo of him being there at the Continental Breakfast. Again, a cut to The Shining. But then they also used the original score from The Shining. It's a song called Midnight in the Park, or I think it's Midnight in the park with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to find it, but
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know about the music.
yes, and so the actual music from The Shining plays under that part of the sketch, and so if you're a Shining fan, you're just like, oh my god, it's all here. But you would only know if you were like that big of a nerd about The Shining. So yes,
that's awesome. So I remember when this movie came out, just like it just was like, oh, maybe on like that side of of this podcast, like, you know, when a new Black thing came out, I think because maybe in part because of like being in the entertainment world a little bit, and just knowing that like I had to claim my Blackness in a different way, or I had begun to claim my Blackness in a new way. When things like that came out, it was like, okay, I'm for sure going to have to see this, even though I'm going to be terrified. And also, the weird thing is that I think that was that experience for a lot of people who weren't even Black. People just felt the need, like they all were like, oh, we all have to see this.
Yeah, I definitely felt that a little bit, because it's not that there are no Black centric and Black produced and Black directed horror movies. There are, but they are in such a fewer supply than the white directed and produced horror movies that come out, and to the point where there are tropes about Black people in horror movies where they always die first, or that they can only be in some way related to being a slave or a villain, and that's the only kind of story they can have, even though there are, you know, there are historical precedents within horror movies for that to be different. One of the first kind of commercially well released and well known zombie movies, Night of the Living Dead, has a Black protagonist, and that was one of the first times that had ever happened, and it was like a huge deal. And there are a lot of parallels between that film and what the original ending of Get Out was supposed to be, which we can talk about later when we get to it. But
yeah,
I felt the need to support the movie, to support more art like this.
Yeah. See, and I think there's a lot of people who, not being horror fans, maybe necessarily, like, I think what happened was like people felt like, oh, I'm not going to be able to participate in society if I haven't seen, like I think there was this immense pressure to either be like, well, or I can't talk to my Black friends at work if I have not seen this movie, like, or I don't get to talk about anything in the culture unless I have seen this movie. And I don't know how that happens beyond, like, I guess him being like this figure that people already knew from this other thing that everybody liked, or that a lot of people liked, and then or like having a lot of money behind it, or the marketing. I don't know how that happens. I don't know how like, because the thing is that like here Kendrick Lamar is with a Pulitzer. I mean, not at the time, but like he has a Pulitzer, right? You would think that would, I mean, and of course a ton of people love Kendrick Lamar, or at least like know his name or know like 2 songs, right?
Right.
But I don't think everybody is rushing to listen to all of his albums the way that people were rushing to see this movie. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And because it was a cultural phenomenon, you know, just for everybody. And the only thing I think I feel similar to it is I've never seen the movie Titanic.
Oh.
Ever. And now it's at a point where like I can't go back and watch it now. Like, why? It's just silly. But as a kid, I wasn't allowed to watch it because of the sex scenes in it. And for a long time, not having just the basic knowledge of that movie was so alienating that I was like, I feel like I'm going to have to watch it. And now I'm like, I don't need to watch a boat sink in real time. But I imagine that if you had not seen Get Out, Can you imagine what that would be like? Like the amount of conversations where you would have been like, oh, I haven't seen it. And people would have been like, what is wrong with you?
Mm-hmm. You know, and it's funny because, and I'm actually going to plug another podcast. They have no idea who I am, but I love these guys. It's a show called Reply All.
Okay.
It's a podcast, as a part of the Gimlet Media, production company. And, but they just started a podcast called Scaredy Cats. And the whole concept behind the show is one of the guys from the show, it's the two hosts of that other show. One of the guys.
You super quick.
Oh, why? What?
They stole the concept of that show. It's like a big deal right now. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And they stole the title from like a YouTube channel too.
Ooh, that's not good.
No, it's not.
Well, I'm still going to talk about the show because it relates to what we were talking about before.
Yeah, go for it.
And still listen to Reply All. I'm not actually plugging this other show. Reply All is fantastic. But this other show, like he started watching. He's trying to watch horror movies because he couldn't watch Get Out.
Right.
And he wants to watch Get Out.
And he's trying to work up to it?
Yes, he's trying to work up to it. Like, that's the really whole goal.
Interesting.
The goal is to start, like, have his friend pick, like, I guess, softcore horror to leading up to Get Out, which I don't even know if that's the right direction, but like that's his goal, is to be able to eventually watch Get Out and enjoy it because he feels left out. And that's the thing that I'm talking about. Like these guys can settle this out in podcast court, but what I'm getting at is like this feeling I'm like listening to this white dude from New York just express like this extreme pain over feeling left out of something that happened in society. And I'm like, this is a movie. Wow. Like, how did that happen?
Well, here's what's super interesting. So there's another show with the same concept that's been going on for like 2 years. And then there's a YouTube channel with the same concept that has the same title that is unrelated. Mm-hmm. And the podcast that's been going on for a couple of years is called Horror Virgin. The idea being that one of them has like can't watch horror movies, hates them, has never seen cultural touchstones because they consider horror to be a cultural touchstone, but they watched Get Out fairly early on because he was like, oh, this isn't scary, this is awesome.
Right. And that's why I was like, is this a direction that, I mean, because I'm like, yes, it is. I will say, as somebody who doesn't like horror movies, like you know, doesn't find, I mean, on the scale of things that are scary, I mean, this is not as intense as some things are.
Oh, no, I would say Get Out is soft horror. Like, I would not consider that as scary as many other things, but I think it also depends on the type of horror that you are invested in. Because there are some horror movies that even I just cannot handle, but other people can. And there are movies that I watch and have no problem with that other people physically cannot sit through. So horror is very personal in that way. So, yeah, like for me, like I could watch gore all day, every day. Does not bother me. Doesn't even bother me a little bit. But I have a real tough time watching movies about possession. Which, interestingly enough, Jordan Peele considers Get Out to be a possession film.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So... And it's really interesting. In Eli Roth's history of horror on possession films, they include Get Out. And it's because they have an interview with Jordan Peele where he's like, I consider this to be a possession movie because you've got one person or people taking over another person's body, which is possession. And I think the only reason people don't immediately connect it with other movies like that is because of the cultural and racial elements in the movie that I think play an even bigger part. But one of his big inspirations when he was writing Get Out is The Exorcist, which I physically cannot finish.
That's, you know, what's interesting about that is, prior to me becoming a scaredy cat, I used to watch horror movies, and I used to, like, I guess would say that I enjoyed them, and maybe I did. And the ones that I like, I consumed the most, and I thought were the most scary. And I was like, why even bother if it's not going to scare me? But this was like back when I was a like preteen to teenager.
Yeah,
I preferred I preferred possession movies. So I've watched The Exorcist. I've watched all the Omens, all of them.
So
I watched Rosemary's Baby.
Now, I recently watched Rosemary's Baby because I had to watch it for research on the Antichrist for my other show, and
as you do,
and I actually really enjoyed Rosemary's Baby.
It's good,
way more than I expected to. But what I find really interesting is I feel like people who were raised in a religious context go one way or the other. Either they're like me and they have a really tough time with it and really don't like watching it, or they're all in and they're like, yeah, I'll watch any possession movie, I don't care.
Yeah.
And I find it really interesting who falls on what side of that fence. It's a very polarizing.
I think because especially at the time, you know, like growing up in a religious household, like, and if, you know, my mom was into scary movies, and so I was trying to, you know, keep up. And at the time, I think I like was numbing my sensitivity to it. And so for me, like, it was really what was at issue was, well, what could happen? And so for my like brain at the time, like, okay, well, I believe in possession. That shit's real. Okay, this is the real stuff. Like, it was on a scale of like, I didn't believe like the alien stuff or like, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, that kind of thing. But I fully believe like, oh, demon's gonna get me. Yup. Yes. So yeah.
Now, this is something I kind of found with myself in zombie movies is that because I have done a lot of introspection into why I like the horror movies I do and why I gravitate towards certain types of horror. And for me, the scariest part of zombie movies is not the zombies themselves. It is the people who are still alive and trying to survive.
That's scary. Wait, they're scary?
Yes.
Because they can survive?
No, because people who are scared will make choices that are dangerous.
That's true.
And so like there's a scene in the most recent War of the Worlds, the one with Tom Cruise. It's not great. I don't recommend it. But there is a scene where they have a car and they get carjacked by a survivor who happens to have a gun. They get out of the car. That survivor drops the gun, gets in the car to drive away. Someone else picks up the gun, shoots that guy, gets in the car, drives away. Somebody else shoots that guy. And it's literally like, and it's this fear of people cannot care about anything outside themselves when they are in this position. There is no empathy. There is no collective survival. There is only the thinking of themselves and surviving personally, and that ideology is terrifying to me. That's one of my biggest fears. Yeah.
Well, let's get into the movie.
Yes, please.
I mean, so, you know, everybody, spoilers. I mean, the beginning of this movie, I'm trying to remember, did they show the beginning of this movie in the trailer? I feel like they did.
So they showed a little bit of it. Yeah, just a little bit, but they very, very quickly got to her parents' house. So they didn't give it a lot of time in the beginning. We didn't get to hear Lil Rel warning him about white girls.
Right.
That's something that we only get in the film.
I mean, but like that section where it's what's his face? What's the actor's name? Where he gets basically kidnapped.
Oh, so no, that's not in the trailer. That very opening scene.
Okay.
extremely frightening because that
Yeah.
actor looks a lot like one of my college roommates.
Oh, really?
Who was a jazz saxophonist, still is a jazz saxophonist.
Wait, is this the one that didn't know about grilled cheese?
Yes. But Ricky Hopkins, he makes amazing music. Check it out. He just put out a new album like about a month and some change ago. So, but he looks a lot like him. He also looks a lot like a guy I went to high school with. It's like if there was like a melding of those two. So for me, this initial scene is actually very scary because I was like, this feels like people I know being kidnapped. And it also seemed very real. I feel like one of the most effective parts of this scene is that it really kind of harkens back to a case like Trayvon Martin, where you have someone walking through an affluent neighborhood and then a car just pulls up. And that's one of my biggest fears for my African-American friends is that could just happen to somebody. And it's terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, I really, really loved the beginning because, I mean, it's a very, it's a very typical thing. I mean, I'm speaking as somebody who I'm like, I don't like horror movies now, but I have watched them. So I do know like the kind of things that you usually see in horror movies, which is like kind of an opening scene giving like, there's something to be afraid of, but you don't know what it is.
Yes.
And it doesn't necessarily relate to the actual main character. Like somebody else is affected by it first. And then you have the main character kind of responding physically and emotionally to what they don't know is happening.
Right. Yeah. And I think that opening scene does a really great job of conveying to the audience without specifically showing them what they should be afraid of. We know what we should be afraid of in that scene, and it colors our view of the rest of the characters in the movie.
Absolutely. I mean, and the music, oh my God, the music. And actually, now that you say it, now thinking about like the possession, it being a possession movie, the music is very evocative of that because it's very like voodoo, like from, like African chanting. That makes a lot of sense. And
also Redbone.
Yeah, Redbone. Yeah, absolutely. But I think the that under the track of that is like that African chanting, which is, it reminds me of like the Gregorian chant, that you hear when you're watching The Omen. Like it's the same shit, but from a different country. Like that was good. But anyway, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. Yeah, it definitely does.
Okay. Wait, so tell us things that like, I mean, I don't know, but I wouldn't know having only watched this once because I can only watch it once.
There's a few different things with this movie. I mean, the main thing is viewing it through the lens of a possession narrative. I think the sunken place is there's a lot to be pulled from that as far as symbolism, even just the name. It's this implication that we are going to subjugate Black people for the furthering of white people, which is basically this theme in the movie, because you have white people literally stealing a Black person's body to further their agenda. And in a possession movie, it's, a demon or the devil usually stealing a body for their own agenda, but that agenda is not necessarily as clear. And I think something in this movie that's really interesting is we know exactly why they're doing what they're doing. It takes us a while to figure out how or why, but it's not surprising, which I think is in some cases troubling. I don't know about you, but I would feel, and I'm sure he does in the movie, but I feel like they kind of explain it away, when he gets to her parents' house and they have Black people working as their house staff. And I'm like, how is this not your first, like, oh, this is bad. Like, this is terrifying. I did like that they have Bradley Whitford say that he would have voted for Obama a third term.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such one of the best lines in the movie, because it does give you this. It allows for racism to transcend political party, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, like what I loved about the main character and the way that they wrote him is I feel like they were writing the kind of character that you like. I don't even remember what they gave us in terms of like what his. Oh yeah, because they did get into his background, but with his mom, and yeah, I think that like there's so many people that are trying to survive, right? Yeah. There's so many, and I mean by people, I'm talking right now about Black people. So there's so many different ways that you are either numbing yourself to the things that are going on, or in order to survive, you are like just not paying attention to them or not letting them bother you. So in some ways, you're playing your own devil's advocate in your head, and there's I think over time your soul begins to reject that. If you live long enough, your soul begins to reject it, because the evidence is there's so much evidence in our face right now, right? That you're not making it up. And I think like the way that they wrote him is he's the kind of guy that's like trying to see the good in everybody, right? He's like, I'm not interested in being angry at everything. You know, he's being the kind of person that white people want him to be, which is not making a fuss, not looting, not setting targets on fire, right?
Right.
He's being the person that they want him to be, and so that's why in that moment when you see two Black, a maid and whatever that guy's his role was, their house,
like a groundskeeper.
Yeah, I think that kind of person, or a person who's in that part of their journey as a Black person, can easily just be like, oh, okay, like at least they're let me just watch and see how they treat them. Okay, they're treating them well, like. So, okay, no harm, no foul here, right? Like they seem happy initially, right? Until they seem weird.
Right. Which, for me, one of the most terrifying scenes in the movie is when he confronts the maid, the housekeeper, and she's crying, but also saying, like,
smiling.
No, I'm fine. At the same time. Yeah, crying and smiling at the same time. Yeah. Yeah, that to me was the most unsettling at that point in the movie. Obviously, there are very unsettling things that come after, but like at that point when you're still not 100% sure what's going on, very unsettling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think if you have like a Spike Lee character in that role, you kind of, the jig is up too soon, right?
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, just if we take that to like what's happened in society, it's like, all right, so many people to survive are, like they're trying to be like the Daniel Kaluuya, like they're trying to be that role just to like to eat and have jobs, and you know what I mean, and or because they're in churches where they're told, you know what I mean, different it comes at you from all these different places. And so that's why a lot of the brutality and the injustice can continue.
Right.
Because we're all okay, this seems fine. This seems normal. Okay, that's fine. These white people are treating them okay, it seems like, I guess,
Yeah, it's this idea of like, well, at least they have a job. Like I don't know if you ever heard people like that, where you're like, hey, it seems like that person in that service position might not be treated as well, and they're like, well, it's better that they have a job than don't. And I'm like, missing the point, I think.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Uh, Go ahead.
I think they did a really great job of, even in this quote unquote progressive house, which is what they do a very good job of painting these people as the white people, like the good white people,
Mm-hmm.
like, or what we would imagine that to be. But then within the people that they have trapped, the groundskeeper and the housekeeper, they have them playing very classic African American tropes,
Okay.
where like the groundskeeper is unnaturally strong and running everywhere, and they're commenting on his
Mm,
strength all the time, much like you would have a slave back in the day, where it's like things have changed but they haven't,
mm-hmm.
because they have pulled him specifically for those traits, and they are
Mm-hmm.
pulling people specifically for those traits. And the housekeeper is really kind of given a lot of the kind of mothering, caretaking responsibilities that a housekeeper would have been given back in the day. And so it is this very, very stark contrast between people, white people claiming we're the good ones, they aren't slaves, we treat them well, but a very obvious link to the past where those roles would not have been treated well. And I
Mm-hmm.
think they did that deliberately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean, I guess what else do you see as like the symbols that they did a really good job with?
Um, I liked that um they every black person that they take for one stereotyped reason.
Mm,
And which again you see a little bit with the groundskeeper and the housekeeper, but then you also see it with Daniel Kaluuya's character, where he's taken for his art and his creativity. And
mm,
then the man that we saw kidnapped in the beginning, he is taken for his beauty. And it is all of these things that, in a lot of ways, I would say white America covets about black America: strength, kindness, creativity, and beauty. And it is literally, in some ways, taking those things from the black community by
mm-hmm,
taking literal people that bring that about. And
mm-hmm,
I found that very striking. I also found it very striking that when they kind of put him in the sunken place and start playing that video of like what they do and why, that it is a hunting lodge, and it is this transformation from what we would perceive as quote unquote good liberal white people to a lot of the earmarkers of what people would say is like, oh, racist backwoods white people, and it's
mm-hmm,
within the same house. And
mm-hmm,
it is this idea that under this kindness, under this facade of being woke and being progressive, there is still this protected history and these protected desires to subjugate black people. And I found that symbolism very interesting. I also found it very interesting that she hypnotizes people with tea. That it was this very proper ritual that
mm-hmm,
black people would not have been invited to participate in, and her house staff is not invited to participate in. But most tea is harvested in black countries or
mm,
tropical countries or countries that are not white. And so it's a further representation of white people taking something that is inherently black and creative and black owned and using it to then subjugate black people. I found that very interesting. I thought it was interesting to have them talk about the party they were having and have them be like, oh, you'll love it, it's going to be great. And then have the only other black people there be the ones that they had already kind of broken down, and no one
yeah,
else. There were no just black guests there. So I think
Yeah,
there's a lot of cultural implications in this movie that you can watch it just for a horror movie, but I think it's much more interesting when you really, really examine the actions they have given these characters, because I feel like they have so much more meaning even than they do just within the story.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to imagine, remember like what I felt while I was watching the movie.
Yeah, I am
Because
curious.
yeah, I think a lot of what I felt was so I have yet to see Django Unchained. Um,
Really?
yeah, but my mom and so many black people are like, you gotta watch it.
I
And I feel
loved
like the
it.
feeling that they've described feeling in that movie is what I felt in this movie, you know, or just
Okay.
like we like just a level of vindication. And I'm not just talking about the end, I'm just talking about like, oh, they have to see it now. You know,
Yeah.
like they have to see this feel. They have to, they're being invited to experience, like through a horror movie the feelings that we often feel when we go into spaces that are not particularly ours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that was interesting, just like putting that feeling front and center. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember once in college, I was invited to go on this like night cruise with a bunch of like I guess it was like a friend's very rich church was putting on this thing, and so we were gonna go, and another of my friend was going as well, and he was also white, but I was just like, I knew just the name of the church and the person that was initially inviting me, I'm like, it's gonna be all white people, like I know who's that going, like that wasn't even a question in my mind, like
Right.
it, will I be there? I was like, I already assumed, I knew, right, going
Yeah.
into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember for like a week I was trying to get my friend, my best friend, to go with me. I was like, please be black with me at this party. Please go
Mm-hmm.
with me. And this was all going on behind the scenes. Like the guys that initially invited me, they didn't know, but I kept trying to invite her, and she just ultimately decided not to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very funny to me when we, you know, we were about to get in the car to go, and my one friend to me, like thinking he's being sensitive, thinking he's real, like he's just realized the situation. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I don't know how to say this, but you might be the only black person there. And I lost my shit. I laughed so much in his face. I was
You're like,
like,
I know.
yeah, I like the fact that you've just put this together just shows to me how white you actually, and this goes back to the point where you're talking about like, you know, them showing like these are liberal white people, these are the ones
Yeah.
that are trying to be the good ones, and that's who he was, you know. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, not that that takes away from like the, you know, whatever good he wanted to be or was trying to be, but it exposes his his blindness.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, dude, I've been knowing, like, and so that I kept joking with him throughout, you know, on the drive over. I was like, well, you know, maybe the chef or like the wait staff, like maybe they'll be. And
uh,
this was like 8 years before Get Out came, you know, and it's just like we know what it is, and so there is a level of like, I mean, I guess I wouldn't have never described it as horror, but there's this feeling of unease that if I mean, I'm just so glad that somebody exploited that for a movie.
yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like I have a theory that people understand people better when they have friends that are those people.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways that's a huge problem when dealing with, you know, be it groups of a certain race or even like a sexual orientation or a gender identity. I feel like my parents didn't really understand gay people well until they had gay friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think it made a difference for me. And I feel like in so many ways, there are white people who just don't have black friends or only have one black friend
Yeah.
that they use as their calling card for not being racist.
Yeah, they're an alibi.
Yeah, and I think that makes a huge difference, that some people seeing this movie would have never been invited into that feeling, would have never understood that feeling. I have been with you at an event where you were one of the only black people. It's pretty rare in Los Angeles, but like it happens sometimes. I have been with other friends where that has been the case. I've been the only white people places. Like it's you kind of, if you've never experienced that feeling, I feel like it is almost necessary to have an understanding of this movie. And I feel like it does a great job of trying to give you a visual representation of what that is like.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think that was great. And then, I think this job did a great job of repairing the reputation of TSA. I mean, man, like.
True though. True.
I was like, every TSA person needs a T-shirt that just says, "I'm the motherfucking TSA."
It reminded me of, I was watching Men in Black the other day because it's Will
As
Smith.
you do.
And as you do, why wouldn't you? It was, Men in Black was on, and there's that early scene in the movie where Will Smith chases a guy down, knocks him down, and then just says NYPD. That means I will knock your punk ass down. And his ending, like, TS motherfucking A, reminds me of that, of the knock your punk ass down. Love it. Absolutely love it.
Okay, you were mentioning earlier, what was the other the alternate ending for the...
Ooh, okay. So there, and you mentioned you heard from people who had seen it. I've seen clips of like storyboards and things, and then there are a few shots from it that are still in the movie. They're just in a different context. So the ending that aired in the theaters is that he gets out to the road, he stabs that white girl to death, basically, or strangles her. I forget, but he kills the white girl, and then he looks up and he sees red and blue lights, which we know is the cop. And in the theatrical version, that cop car pulls up, and it's his friend Lil Rel from the TSA, and he saves the day. In the original ending, the red and blue lights pull up, and Daniel Kaluuya puts his hands up, and then he is shot by the police. Basically, this idea of, even if you made it, even if you got out, even if you did everything right to survive, we're still going to get you. And it was determined that it was too upsetting of an ending, not necessarily for white people necessarily, but more that we've seen him kind of conquer so much that it feels like the story's incomplete, and it feels like it's out of sync with the rest of the attitude of the film. But part of the reason that they have that ending is because of George Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 1965, because in that movie, Ben, who is the black protagonist and helps the main character, basically he shows up and helps her kind of barricade her house against these zombies. In that movie, the police eventually do come to help save the day, and they shoot Ben because they believe that he is harming her instead of protecting her. And so it is a callback to that film. And now, granted, that's something that if you're not a huge horror nerd, you don't know, and would not have necessarily translated easily across all audiences. But I do feel like, I'm not gonna stand here and say I wish that was the end of the movie. I love the original and I love the theatrical ending as well. But I will say I understand that original ending. I understand putting it there. I would not have been mad if that was the original ending. It would have been an upsetting story. It would have been an upsetting ending as opposed to a triumphant one.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it would have been a very real ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I just felt yeah, I don't know. I know how I would have felt. I would have felt re-traumatized for sure.
Oh, for sure.
But I think there's something about like because what I felt in this movie, as opposed to like other scary movies that I had been forced to watch after I like kind of gave them up. Because my best friend had this thing where she was like, oh, I'll do this thing that you want to do if you watch a scary movie with me. So somehow I ended up watching The Strangers in the theater.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, with Scott Speedman, whatever the hell those clowns were doing. Anyway, but what I loved about this in particular was they pushed the moments of tension and consistently relieved them with humor. Right. And so to me, if that had been the ending, it would have been inconsistent with the rest in that regard, because every time you felt like, you couldn't handle any more, they would kind of burst that tension with a moment of humor.
Yeah. The rest of this movie was designed for white people to go see in the theater with their friends and sit there while their black friend looks at them.
Yeah.
Until they get it. That's the ideal way to watch the movie.
That's so true. That's spot on. Yeah.
I just remember the movie ended and I just went, fuck.
It was funny because I actually watched this movie, I think with only black people.
Okay.
And even the row that I was in, like, I think our particular row was like all black because we were, I think, unfortunately late. That's usually not my MO. I'm usually on time, but I was compromised.
Functional.
Yeah. I was compromised by the company that I was keeping at the time. And so we ended up sitting close to the front, which also happened to be like next to like quite a few other black people that I guess had also showed up late. And so, but the funny thing was, so like we're all dying in our row. And there was moments where, like, I mean, because the rest of the theater was white. We were in, like, I think we were in Hollywood.
Did you go to the ArcLight or some shit?
Yes, we did. We went to the ArcLight. We went to the motherfucking ArcLight.
Late? Oh my god!
Yeah. So we go to the ArcLight, and then, and I'm sitting there. We're watching it, but there were definite moments where I'm looking at these. Like, I would turn around, like, aggressively turn around to look at all the white people. In the middle of the movie, we're like, you see this shit? This is real. Like, this ain't no fantasy.
I had the opposite experience when I went to go see Paranormal Activity.
Oh man, you saw it with black people. See,
yeah.
Honestly, I would go see more horror movies, I guess, if there were more black people in the theater.
It is the ideal way to see horror movies. I stand by that. And I had to go see it for a field trip because I was in college at the time when it came out. And so it was me. There were only 6 people in our class, and one of the guys in our class was black. And then, so it's like 5 white people and then a room of black people because we were on the west side, kind of further south because we were by UCLA. And at one point, a woman stood up in the row in front of us and just said, "Damn, she needs Jesus." And I lost my mind. I laughed so hard. And it was at like a really scary point in the movie. And I loved it. We came out of the theater and I was like, this is the best way to see this movie. And my professor was like, I wish people had been more respectful of the cinema. I was like, fuck you.
Yeah, exactly.
This is how this movie was meant to be viewed.
It's funny because, you know, like I grew up around. I grew up in a mixed, you know, but I was around a shit ton of white people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because I stopped watching horror movies, my knee jerk response is verbal now.
Oh yeah,
when I watch horror movies, and so it actually ends up being very much like watching horror movies with, you know, the black people, like a bunch of black people from the hood, because I am yelling everything because I have to emote, otherwise it builds up inside.
I feel like that should be acceptable in horror movies.
I agree.
I'm going to stand here and say the best option for watching horror movies is a scenario in which you can verbalize like that if you need to, because I think it kind of galvanizes the crowd. I think everyone starts to get more scared and you're kind of in it together. And that's what kind of makes seeing horror movies in the theater so great. And I think one of the last ones I saw in the well, I guess I saw Midsummer, but before that I saw a movie called Crawl in the movie theater, and it's basically like Jaws but with a giant gator. That's all you need to know. It's only it's like 80 minutes long. It's like it's I think it's on Netflix right now. Fun watch. And I screamed my head off. We were one of the only people in the theater, but at one point in the movie there was just like a jump scare and I just screamed motherfucker and just like jumped out of the skin, and my husband was like, babe, like what are you, and I'm like, it's scary, like what are you doing? It's meant to scare people, right?
So what are you doing sitting there like a robot?
Yeah, fucking sociopath is not scared of this shit. I think people should be allowed to yell in horror movies all they want.
So, okay, before we wrap this up, what is something, because how many times would you say you've seen this movie?
Get Out? Ooh.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been a while since I've watched it, but at least a handful of times close to when it came out, and then I've definitely watched it at home since it's been out as well.
What would you say is something that you think it's easy to miss the first time around that you hope that people will get when they watch it? Like if people are going to rewatch it or going to watch it for the first time, what do you hope they'll see?
I think the house is really important. And this is just something I have with horror movies in general, but specifically in this house, there are changes to the house as the movie progresses. So like the version of the house that you see initially really does serve that kind of like liberal white people narrative. And then it gets more country as they get darker.
That's interesting.
It's one of those things where initially things seem very kind of clean and modern, and then more and more kind of kitschy, floral, hunting things come out the longer the movie goes on, which is actually something I kind of noticed watching it the first time and was just like, oh, that's interesting, but like didn't pay a ton of attention to it. And in subsequent times watching it was like, oh no, this is deliberate. There is definitely, and anytime you're watching any horror movie, always watch that stuff. That's like Horror 101. Midsummer had like the entire story on the walls, like,
oh wow,
so that if you go back and watch it, you're like, oh my god, that's exactly what's going to happen 2 scenes from now. Or Hereditary is another one where certain characters only do things on the left, which sounds like a weird thing to notice, but it's a movie that deals with the occult and occult magic and evil occult magic. And so you can always tell who is evil in the story because they're on the left, meaning the left-hand path or dark magic. So there's always stuff like that going on in horror movies. So I feel kind of attuned to it, but definitely in Get Out, watch The House. The House tells a lot of that. Yeah.
Okay, that's fascinating. So let's give a review. Out of how many hair picks?
Oh, this is 10 out of 5 hair picks for
wow.
me.
Yeah.
I love this movie.
Yeah.
I legitimately love it. I think it's great. I think everyone should watch it. I thought it
Mm-hmm.
got kind of robbed Oscar-wise, but horror movies
Yeah.
never win, and
Mm-hmm.
also they hate giving Oscars to Black people, so that's a thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I really liked it. I also really liked Us after, and I am very
Mm-hmm.
excited for Candyman. So I'm
Yeah.
excited for this new inclusive horror renaissance that we got
Mm-hmm.
going on. I
Mm-hmm.
am excited. Yeah.
Yes, surprisingly enough, I did also force myself to watch Us, which I thought was significantly more scary than Get Out.
Yeah, it's very, very scary.
Thank you for saying that, because
welcome.
people have been bitches about it.
Well, Us speaks specifically to my personal fears because again,
Mhm.
it's people in desperate times making desperate choices.
Right.
And I remember right before Us came out when you were psyching yourself up to go see it. And I remember that you were like, we have to go see it. We have to support Jordan for the community, for the culture. We have to go. And I was like, I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I don't know why. we actually went, if I remember correctly, I think we went with Danielle Radford and her boyfriend at the time, Derek Lemos.
Uh-huh.
And so we felt very white because again, we were like the whitest people there. But that was a very I felt very scared in Us, and I think that's a fascinating meditation on classism in America. People
Absolutely.
should get into it.
Yeah.
Very meaningful film, and I'm excited for. I really want you to go see New Candyman. I know you don't want to.
Okay. I mean, I might be. Recent circumstances may force me to do it.
It
just
looks
because.
amazing.
Kind of going back to Get Out, I would say same. I would say, yeah, 5 out of 5 hair picks, all the hair picks. Like, he gets all the hair picks for this because, never have I ever felt so much at the center, like issues that I am personally dealing with. In fact, recently an episode of Insecure, highlighted a very familiar moment for me. And it was so good. If you guys aren't watching Insecure, this is a spoiler, but in it, the character Molly, she goes on vacation with her boyfriend who is Asian, and her brother, her boyfriend's brother and his girlfriend comes along, and she has an issue. She deals with an issue of racism that's particular to Black racism, and he kind of encourages her. He kind of plays devil's advocate with her. And I just was like, this is so familiar to me, and I don't know why I've never seen it on the screen. Never in this way. And I'm like, how smart of them to do it with not white people, right?
Yeah.
It's not what, because it's not just, and even there, it's not just even like other races, even Black people. We've all had, there's ways that all of us have taken in and drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, of white supremacism. And we parrot that back to each other. We parrot it back to ourselves. And that is one of the things that I love so much about this movie is, it's showing, it puts white supremacy on trial.
Yeah.
And and that's what's happening now. That's what the world is seeing happening now with this country. Is that white supremacy is on trial, and you see it not just in the white communities, you see it in all the other communities, and how people are responding to it. How people are responding to Black people, even Black people, how they're responding to other Black people. You can see how there's white supremacist ideals in so much of what we believe.
Yeah, and historically, I mean, white supremacy has existed for a long ass time, but specifically in the politics of our country, there has been a renewed surge of white supremacy over the last 20 to 30 years that has gone unchecked, and especially now. And people need to be vigilant about it, because it is a force that seeks to undermine the very things that we would call American. which are the ideals of people being free and being included and having the ability to try and achieve their dreams. And it's very easy for white supremacist ideals to be couched in this idea of being American means a specific thing, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to the beauty of America is our diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And so always, I would say, be careful whenever you hear people parroting how someone should react to trauma or to blatant racism, because the
Mm-hmm.
policing of those reactions is part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I think we did it. I mean, I think we're trying to bring some levity in the situation, because I think that's important, that never goes away.
Yeah.
That we still, we're serious. We have moments of being serious, but also can talk about some lighter things, which I think, again, like Jordan Peele did so well in this movie.
Yeah.
There has to be moments of laughter, even in the midst of extreme pain. And so in the show notes, we will put some links to some organizations that you can donate to, that will help people who are dealing with this issue head on. But I think this is the best way to get into it for this podcast. There's other places where we both, Paige and I, and even other people, have platforms to talk about these issues. But I think for now, this is good for this podcast. I think we did what we wanted to do, and without ignoring what's happening.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for listening, and check out the show notes and write us a review, share this podcast with your friends, and we'll be back next time. Bye.
Bye.